So, you want to make a Sonic fan game? Well, first let me preface that this guide doesn't just work for Sonic fan games. It can also work for almost any fan game or original game, at least for the most part. It should also work as a little guide to get into game development in general. In this guide, I will try my best to go over most types of Sonic fan games. The idea here is to give you a starting point, or if you should start at all. After all, this isn't for everyone. Game development in general takes a lot of work and dedication. While I'm aware that you won't be making all the game's objects and assets by yourself, as in you're gonna be using pre-made objects or from existing libraries, as in the art from the original games, you still have to manage and learn the basics of several disciplines like image editing, basic programming logic, basic software knowledge, and how to operate a computer. Yes, how to operate a computer. In today's world, with the explosion of smartphones, a lot of kids aren't growing up with computers. That's really unfortunate. Let me just say that you cannot develop a game in mobile devices alone. While I'm sure someone was able to do it, and I know it's possible to write code on mobile devices, most mobile devices just don't have the power, interface, or software to handle game development. I started back in 2010, where I started to work on my first game, Sonic Before the sequel. After being done with those fan games, I moved on to original projects. My first one being Spark the Electric Jester, which was released on Steam to a very positive reception. Well, what is a fan game then? Defining a fan game seems pretty simple, but actually I won't do that. I'll just go with the assumptions that fan games are just games, in general. Turns out making fan games isn't that different from regular game development. Although a couple years ago that wasn't the case, but now there's enough resources and assets out there to say that you can find a base to make almost any type of game. And sometimes you may not even need an artist or a musician. But should you make a fan game? Seriously, this is something you have to look deep in yourself and ask, why do you want to do this? This is no joke. The reasons for making a game are very important to game development, and I seriously don't want to scare you off. Look, the best way for you to know is to get started, but sometimes getting started is the hardest part, if not always, but nonetheless, you should at least try. You see, some people want to make a fan game, and some people want to make a fan game. What I mean by that is that dreaming about a game is easy. If you're like that, it's time to shift your thinking a little bit into the making of the fan game, and not ideas or design. Those will change a lot as the game develops, as it always does, including on big studios. Sometimes games go through major changes in development and turn out very different from their original vision. This isn't a bad thing at all and shouldn't be seen as such. Make your vision for your game flexible and don't feel bad about it. Most of our favorite games went through such things as well. But you might be asking yourself, well, I don't have any skills. How can I make a game? Well, if you're using a computer right now, you most likely do have some skills. After all, you're using the computer. Not everyone can actually do that. Still, that's not the point here. You don't have to have those skills. You will develop those as you worked on the games. I know I did the same. I didn't have barely anything when I started. I only knew basic animation. And, well, I managed somehow. You can do that too. And yeah, you'll have to get your hands dirty. By that I mean, you'll be working on the game directly in some way, either as being part of a team or working solo. Before I go on a massive rant about this, let me just warn you that it's okay to use pre-built assets. Before I go on a massive rant about this, I just want you guys to know that it's okay to use pre-built assets, and by that I mean either things from an asset store or from the franchise the game is based off of. This is a very common practice among fan game creators. This counts for almost anything, from sound to art. Right, so here's the soul-crushing part. There is no place for an idea guy or a director. Well, kinda. Let me also say that this isn't really a place for a designer either. Game design is cheap. While there is a lot you can learn about game design out there, it's not that valuable here, and anyone can do it with some effort. It's not that much terminology, there isn't that much literature on it, just a couple of YouTube videos should get you started on the basics of what you should and should not do in a game. Look, I know this is not something people really want to hear, but I will go on later to explain why you should also be getting your hands dirty into the game and not just be a designer. It's a very important part about teams and why a lot of them collapse. I will try my best to explaining you why. And also, if you want to make your idea into a reality, you have to be the one behind that idea. One thing that I see a lot, and I do mean a lot, is people who would admit themselves to not having much skill, messaging a couple people who they know have skills, and proposing they should make a game under their own direction, no less. If you yourself did such thing, it's okay, you don't have to feel ashamed. Look, ideas are cheap, and people who have skill almost always have them as well. And I'm sure a lot of them want to make those ideas a reality someday as well. I know for a fact a couple of high quality artists who are like this, and want to make their own fan games. Some are already actually deep in development, just not yet released. So, to summarize, ideas are cheap, everyone has them. It's okay if you don't have any skills or talent. You will develop those and maybe even find out what you're good at while making the game. And you should at least give it a try if you're interested. This video will hopefully give you a starting point and point you into the right direction. Okay, now let me ask you a question. Why do you want to make your fan game? This is very important when it comes to your engine choice and where you should begin. I've compiled most reasons people have for making fan games into a triangle. Those reasons are fun, passion, and learning. Fun is the most self-explanatory. You're not really doing anything serious, but most likely doing it for the sake of it. You want to do something on the lines of a game that allows you to make your own levels and objects and fuck around for fun. Pretty much Mario Maker. Well, unfortunately I'll have to gray out this edge of the triangle. I know this is disappointing, but so far the closest thing that comes to an editor for Sonic fan games is ROM hacking, which really isn't fan games. Tools for Sonic ROM hacking have gotten quite advanced since the hobby started, probably about 20 years ago actually. However, ROM hacking is quite limited, and if you want to do anything more than just editing levels and basic stuff, the skill curve can get quite steep, and it's probably one of the hardest things in the whole Sonic game dev fandom. Look, I know this is kind of a bummer, but game dev is work, and so far most available engines require quite a bit of learning before you can, well, just have some fun. This, however, doesn't really apply if you already know how to use any pre-existing Sonic engine and already have some skill in the thing. I'm assuming here you're just a person who's just starting out, but I'm sure there's a lot to learn for experienced people as well. On the other edge of the triangle, we got learning. This is the corner I personally was the closest to. To me, making fan games was all about learning game development. However, even if you want to learn, that doesn't mean you will. For example, it's really easy to procrastinate, meaning not working at all. If you don't work, you're not gonna really learn. This is technically the most important category for your own future. The skills learned in game development can lead you into several disciplines and jobs in the future. However, this might be the least fun of all the corners. On the top, we got passion. This is the hardest corner to define. Here we got things like a dissatisfaction with the current state of the franchise, a desire to express a specific idea, either to prove something, to know if it can be done at all, or just love for a franchise in general. However, this specific thing can be filed under fun as well, as the motivation for it is likely to do with something pleasurable or with something you like. There is overlap, of course. Sometimes you might be somewhat lenient to passion but more towards fun, or more towards learning but with a little bit of passion. I know myself, I think I probably used to lie around more towards learning but with a little bit towards passion. I always wanted to make a Sonic fan game, so there was a little bit of that in it. I did know, however, that I wasn't in it for the fun. I know it's work, and sometimes it can be fun, but that really wasn't the reason I was making fan games. If I wanted to have fun, I would just go play a video game, you know. There is some fun into making fan games, but personally, it's more work than fun. It really is. Passion is also the category where I think most fan games lie on. Not only because it's a really broad category, but also because the reasons themselves are actually very strong. A lot of people tend to, at least in the Sonic community, tend to go for those reasons specifically. In some ways, I believe that there's a little bit of this cornering almost every project that takes itself seriously. And I can't say that I'm not in it either. Now, why is this relevant again? Well, if you're in it for the learning, it might be a good idea to get to know several disciplines. You never really know what you're truly good at until you try it. And sometimes you end up like me, where you have a little bit of everything. And not only that, but you will need to listen to criticism, seriously. And my best advice is to not contest such criticism if learning is your goal. The thing is, not all criticism is that valuable, but keep in mind one simple thing. Under every rude and dumbass comment, there is a reason for a person's dissatisfaction with your game. Take that and try to figure out what is wrong with your game. If people don't like your game, are not paying attention to it, or just don't care, you're likely doing something wrong. You will have to be open to change. Don't stick with your deal until the end. You will need to be malleable, especially if you're just starting. Or you will be stuck with a really bad idea for a really long time, and will just never learn what you need to do to improve and make a good game. Learning isn't just about how to do it, but how to make it good. Keep in mind though, just keep trying. It's okay to scrap things if learning is what you're going for. As long as you keep working, you'll get somewhere. Just remember that knowing how to finish is also a valuable skill. So finishing your game is a good idea sometimes. Not only that, but releasing it is a good way to learn how your game is perceived by others. Watch their Let's Plays. Learn from your mistakes. If they are frustrated and you didn't intend them to be like that, you were likely doing something wrong. If you're in it for the fun of it, you don't really need to listen to criticism. Seriously, I know this sounds kinda ridiculous, but it's true. Sometimes you're just making a game as a joke, or well, just for fun. However, doesn't mean that people won't criticize it. Try your best not to get into arguments. It will ruin your fun, and you're just gonna have to deal with it. That's one of the reasons why I wouldn't recommend making a fan game just for fun. People take it seriously. That's because it is kinda serious. This is the most boring category for me to talk about. Usually most people want to have a little bit of fun while making their games, but most don't seem to choose this route. Not only that, but this is the hardest category to stay on. Like most games, you eventually get bored and stop. And by games, I mean just regular video games. I hope this serves as a little bit of a lesson for people. Making fan games for fun can be nice, but it's still going to be a lot of work. So in the end, I highly recommend you don't just make it for the fun and actually get into some of the other categories and reasons for making the game. Fun is nice, but at the time I'm making this video, the year 2018, it's gonna be a tad tough if you don't have much skill. I don't think I have much to say on passion, but one thing that might prove useful is that it has the potential to be the most stressful of the categories. Unlike in learning, you're not being driven by a goal to get better, but by several other factors that can be a blow to your ego. As in, not being able to achieve what you thought was so simple in your head, or if working as a team, getting into fights with other team members over creative differences, which will eventually lead to someone quitting. Try to show some restraint, especially in teams. You'll have to compromise a lot. Just don't push yourself too hard. It's like in a fighting game. If you're in it just to get better, a loss isn't gonna feel as bad because at least you had something to learn. However, if you're in it to win, shit can get bad if you lose, at least emotionally. Okay, so now that I've wasted your time with some dumbass speculative stuff, let me show you where I think I personally laid on the triangle. Back in the day anyways, now things are a little bit different. Alright, so now that we're done with that, we can move on to the most controversial topic when it comes to my opinions on it. Should you work on a team or solo? That means alone. Well, I'll do my best to give both ways a fair analysis. Just as a little fair disclaimer, I am a big advocate for the solo route, and I'm explaining in detail why. But I'm also experienced with working on teams, surprisingly enough. For reference, I went and finished game design college, which was about 4 years long. During those 4 years, we had a minimum of 2 big group projects a year, where if you were to fail, you would most likely have to redo a lot of classes, if not the whole thing. And you know, if you were to fail, you would have to pay the whole thing again. That was a lot of money, so I really couldn't afford to fail. Where you would have to work as a group and make them mostly from scratch. A demo of an original game with a lot of documents backing up the premise. In some cases I had to do the documents by myself, but in most later cases I actually was able to rely on some people who didn't actually know how to program and make the game, but actually were pretty damn helpful with those damn documents. God damn, those things are fucking garbage. By the way, if you want to be a game designer, that's the thing you'll be making. It's those documents. Newsflash, they're shit, long, nobody reads them, nobody cares. Oh yeah, and those documents, by the way, they're called GDDs, or Game Design Documents. Aside from an initial failure in the first one, I was successful with good grades right until the end, and while struggling to work as a team, which isn't easy when a lot of the team members aren't specialized in any discipline with no leadership. I was able to learn a lot from the process, and with almost 10 years of seeing fan projects rise and fall, I think I can safely say that I know what I'm talking about. Alright, cool. I hope this was fair enough. I have a lot of experience at this. I really hope you were at least open to listen to me on this one. A lot of people aren't. They just like to assume what I said is something that I didn't say. This is speculation on my part, but I do feel like some people think I'm attacking their character directly or attacking their own life decisions. I'm not saying that you shouldn't work on team projects. What I'm saying is that if you're not compatible with team projects, you should probably not work on them. I personally am not. I work well mostly alone, and there's a lot of people like that. They just don't realize that. They feel like they need to have a team. This is something that they have to have because that's how games are made, right? It's a team. Well, that's where you would be wrong. So many games out there are just made by like one guy. So first, I'll be starting with teams. Let's start by presenting some pros and cons of working as a team. A good thing of working as a team is that work can be specialized, and some people can overall have an easier time since the workload is spread over the team members. If members are competent at their roles, the product can end up overall at a higher quality. Right, that seems pretty great, right? And yeah, your game can be better if you were to work in a team. However, just from that sentence, you can spot a couple flaws. First and foremost, even if you can spot a couple flaws, that sentence itself is actually a very good thing for some people. If you can meet the conditions in that sentence, you should be able to make a very good game. In fact, I think your game will probably be of a higher quality than most games, but it's just really, really hard, and I'll explain why. Right, so what is your team making? Seems like an easy thing to answer, right? You're making a video game, a Sonic game, or anything, really. Well, not so fast. Even if everyone agrees on what kind of game they're making, it's very unlikely that they will always share the same vision, and that may manifest on things that don't fit the game in any ways and could result in a mess. To solve this issue, that's why some games have directors and designers. The main function of a director or a designer, sometimes, is to keep the team's vision in line, along with other sub-directors like an art director or a sound director. However, those aren't really entirely necessary for fan games since your team won't be likely greater than 10 people. And it shouldn't be. Please keep it small. It's a lot easier to manage. But there's a problem. Those guys are essentially bosses. They have the power to reject assets that don't fit within their vision or within the vision that they perceive to be of the group's vision. As in, sometimes a group won't have ideas dictated by a director, but will have things like brainstormed and set within the team, and then a director would serve the role of interpreting that idea, making sure that he knows what the team is talking about, and then implementing what the team wants. I know I have been myself in that position. In most college projects, nobody would want to just go with my idea. They always wanted to chip in themselves. So while I wasn't really a director, I ended up doing something of the sort for several projects. Not most of them. Some of them I had to work under some other people that were trying to be directors. It didn't work for the most part, I would say. I mean, they would give me their ideas and what they think the team wanted for the game, but then in implementing that idea, I would just find a lot of problems and a lot of holes in what they wanted me to do. They would say, oh, this character is gonna go in there and he's gonna build a tent. Well, there's so many ways in a video game to build a tent. There is via cutscene, there is via, actual like a tool that you get and then you build the tent, or you can just press a button in a place and the tent would have been built. Will they use some kind of resource? Do I have to gather wood? Do I have to gather anything? They just didn't know why, because they just wanted the player to build a tent. They just came out with this idea for a game, but turns out, holy shit, mate, there's a lot more to this. And that's a thing they will always need to keep in mind. That's one of the reasons why I do think, even if you're a director in a video game, you should get your hands dirty, but we'll talk more about that soon enough. Anyways, here's the thing though. Nobody likes having a boss, and that's how the director is kind of going to be. If your team doesn't have a director, it can result in a team where everyone is the boss, which leads into absolute anarchy. How can you have a team when everyone is the boss, when everyone has the power to reject assets and tell people this isn't gonna fit, and there comes this guy and says yes, this is gonna fit. Now you have a major fight between team members, and maybe one of them is gonna get angry and quit. The second rule is do not, and I repeat, do not slack off. Your whole game depends on you, and so does everyone under you. A lot of people are relying on you with this. And seriously, talk to your team members. And depending on your deadline, depending on when you need to get your project done, talk to your team members at least once a week. Check on their progress. Unless it's like a weekend or a holiday, then you can probably just let them slide. And give out assignments, as in give them out something to do. If they're idle, make sure they always have something on the table to do. Look, if people really don't want to work on your game, then you don't have to get them assignments. You really don't. And if they quit your game and they're not working on your game, it's okay for them to quit. Don't feel bad if they quit. Seriously, some people just don't like doing work. Just don't like doing it. But you should also keep in mind their fatigue. If they just got done doing something, don't assign them something new immediately after. Sometimes it's okay to do this, but sometimes this might lead your team members to avoid you. Seriously. Because you're a boss, you're giving them out stuff. Sometimes they just won't want to talk to you. Third, be an alpha chimp. Yeah, no joke. Apparently in wild chimp groups, one thing that the alpha male does is break fights between group members. Don't let aggressive behavior foster and try to keep a nice environment in your team. That also means you should approach problematic team members with caution and handle the situation with care and respect. Make sure those members respect you, even if they don't respect the rest. If they don't respect you, it's far better that you kick them out of the project. If you don't respect your boss, then why should you be in there? And I know kicking someone out of your project might be bad, and it is bad. It's gonna look bad on your team. One of the reasons why you should also be careful a lot with the people you get in your project. People make really bad decisions with who they choose to be in their teams. Team projects are very tricky, and if your ship sinks, everyone will sink along with you. In some cases, the breakdown of a team or a studio can have really bad consequences for a group of people. Handle teams with care, especially if you're in it for the learning. There's a lot of learning that there is working as a team. Depending on what you want to do with your future, working on teams is incredibly valuable. There is no shame in sinking your ship sometimes, especially if it's a small project. The smaller the ship is, the less the sink will matter. Look, I probably said this several times, but keep your team small. It's gonna be easier to manage, and the smaller the ship is, the less you're gonna lose when it sinks. And it will probably sink. Most team games sink. You just don't hear about them because they're dead. And well, there's a lot of them that you hear about and that haven't been finished for like 10 years. But when a team project is worked mainly by one individual with help here and there on the side, usually it tends to succeed eventually. As long as the guy keeps working on it, eventually it gets done. Right, so for regular team members, well, make sure you do the work. Really, and don't get pissed if the director tells you something needs to be redone. In an actual job, you'll likely be told that several times. The difference is that you'll actually be paid. But let me tell you something, a little anecdote from my own experience. I scrap things all the time. I just work on things, and if a thing just doesn't work, it's not good, I scrap it. I have the guts to do that. A lot of people don't. So just follow what your director says. At the end of the day, if you're here for the learning, if you're here to get better at your specific discipline, you don't lose a single thing by scrapping something. You really don't. The next time you do it, you're just gonna make something better, regardless of what happened. Seriously. And if you think you made something good based on luck, the next time you do it, it's likely gonna be better and better and better, so much to the point that you're going to overpass that one time that you got lucky, and you're just gonna be better than that one time forever. With that in mind, the best course of action for you as a regular team member is to go on a team with a learning mindset. Also, another little thing, you don't have to work your ass off if the director is a little bit too pushy. Well, I know I've been talking about directors for a while, so how about actually planning the game? Well, in my opinion, that's up to the director's discretion, or the team as a collective. However, games where ideas come from several people, and the thing they've been calling the collective this whole time, are far more likely to end up in a mess. Sometimes the mess can work reasonably well, but sometimes it can get pretty badly. As in, people aren't able to communicate with themselves what their idea is, and conflicts can emerge. As you can probably see, I talked to you guys already about a lot of issues with working as a team. This isn't due to trying to scare people off of working as a team, well, it partially is that, but it's also about just teaching people what are the things you shouldn't be doing while working as a team. I think this is very important because I just seen so many team projects fail, and so many people trying to form teams, and their games fail, and they already have a title for the game even, and they fail even before they can form a team. It never happens. And I just want to make this clear to people. my agenda really is to see more fan games out there, is to get more people into game development and to teach them what they should and should not do, because I've made mistakes and I've seen people make mistakes and I don't want people to repeat them. They're just never documented. This stuff is always behind the scenes. Nobody knows. Let me tell you about one thing that you probably think it's true, but turns out it is true. Well, if you're into video games and want to make them, you're most likely an introverted type. So there's a lot of people who are into video games and want to make them. Introverts tend to not be great with communication, and that's a thing you need a lot for group projects, especially if you're a director and designer or a designer. Communicating your ideas and feelings is very important, and miscommunicating those could result in a disaster. Look, I've spoken a lot about teams, and I don't think people will stop making the same mistakes over and over again. Fact is, working on a team is the best way to learn how to work on a team. Experience is good, but the consequences of failure are sometimes high. That's why you need to manage things. That's why, again, keep your team small. For example, people like to work with their friends. This is actually an absolutely terrible idea. Group projects are known to ruin friendships. Trust me on this one, I've seen this happen before a lot, and those can end quite badly, with horrible fights over something you probably didn't even start to work to begin with. Seriously. Look, I don't want to say that you need to work with complete strangers. Try to work with people that have been around in certain communities on the internet, that you know them a little bit, that you know that they probably aren't bad people, but there are really bad people out there. And sometimes you might be caught up in some really bad circles. Sometimes it's usually, well, to my experience, it's usually one bad apple. It's only one guy. But I've seen some shit, man. Legit criminals and people who are not in it for anything good. I've seen liars, especially in fan games. I've seen people who lie about who they are and what they do. Also people who lie to extort money from people as well. Do not, and I repeat, do not give anyone your money if such thing ever happens. Seriously, even if someone says they're in bad health, it's their responsibility, not yours. Most of the times I've seen this happen. Usually, the family of the person takes care of it, or themselves. It's not your responsibility to help them. And in most cases, people just go silent when they have a bad thing. They just don't talk to anyone about it. I know this seems like quite a big of a tangent. It is a big tangent, but it is an important one as well. You're gonna be working on teams, so you're gonna be working with people, and people can do some stupid shit. So it's better if you know this. Anyways, I hope this is a good description of working as a team. I know it's very negative from my perspective, but this is just because I have a lot of negative experiences, and I've seen a lot of people have them as well. It's not because I have had them that you won't have them too. Thing is, the reason why I had those experiences myself is that because they're just very common. They happen a lot with specific types of people that are just very common around people who like video games. And this is just normal. It's a very common occurrence. Be on your watch and be responsible. Alright, now it's time to talk about the solo route. This is a very highly recommended route for anyone who wants to learn. But before you say, well, I don't want to learn programming or whatever thing I don't like to do, I'm sorry, but if you're gonna go on this route, you're gonna have to learn a little bit of everything. I know I did so myself, and sometimes it can be quite boring, to say the least, but it is very much worth it. Specialization is good, and it's something you might want, but learning a little bit of everything can be incredibly helpful, especially if in the future you want to be a game designer or a director anyways in actual professional teams. Knowing what other disciplines do and what they can do and their limitations is gonna be just so useful to you, I can't even begin to describe. And if you choose this route, the outcome is not only to get a game released, but almost being able to complete a whole game on your own, which is fucking awesome. This isn't a route for the weak, and you only get stronger as you go, but you need to work. At the start, you're gonna feel quite weak, you're gonna feel like you don't know what you're doing, things are gonna move very slowly, and this is fine, but as you learn, you're gonna start developing things faster and faster and faster until what you're doing is pretty much second nature to you. I know I've seen this happen with me several times where I didn't know how to do something and it felt really hard and it felt like, damn man, this software is garbage, I don't know how to do this. But eventually I just figured it out and now it's second nature. Now I already know what to do, and when I want to do something, I just do it. I don't even think about it. this is also the most empowering of the routes, and the one that will help you the most in the long run. Alright, so let me get this out of the way. You won't really be working solo. A lot of people like to dismiss my argument for the solo route because they feel like they can't ask for help or that other people shouldn't be allowed to help you, which is false. Like, overwhelmingly false. Let me just say this very clearly. It's okay to ask for help. Sometimes you get stuck with a problem and you just can't do a thing, but the kind of help you're asking is the important part. For example, if you're in it for the learning, do not ask people to do something for you. Just ask how it's done. However, if you aren't in it for the learning, it is okay in some circumstances to request that someone does something for you. If sometimes you might be in it for the passion, so you just want to make a Sonic game. Sometimes there's something that you just don't know how to do, and it's just quite advanced. Some people out there are actually willing to help you get through it and do the thing for you. However, do not request things often. Seriously, people are taking time out of their life to do a thing for you. If you become like too reliant on them, you bug them a lot about things, they're not likely to help you at all. Sometimes though, someone will say they will do a thing, but never actually do it. While it can be kind of a dick move, you should understand why you're not their biggest priority in their lives. If they don't do it, never get mad at them. It's fine. You can look for someone else, or you can ask the question again, or you can talk to them about it a week later. Also, if that person turns out to be your friend, just like, don't pressure the guy. Just be extra cool with that person, okay? It's just a better thing to do in that situation. But what if the problem is something really important to your game, and you really need that thing before you can move on? Well, let me tell you why you shouldn't be in that situation and how you can prevent it. Here's the thing, you need to keep your vision flexible. You won't always able to do everything you want to do. This is true for teams as it is for solo. More so in solo, and sometimes even more in teams. Your vision will be shaped by everything around you, including the software and your skill level. Sometimes you just can't do a thing. In my opinion, what you should do is just figure out something else. So here's a little tip that helps me a lot when that happens. Do something else instead, and come back to it later. Seriously, if there's a stage I'm working on, there's a section object I don't know how to do or how to get right, or maybe I'm working on the engine itself and there's a thing that I don't know how to do, well, I'll go work on something else. Different stage, a different action, a different thing that my character does, an object, and I come back to the thing later. Not only I will have a little bit of knowledge from working on something else, especially if it's on the same area, so let's say programming. I can't do a certain thing in programming, then I go and I do something else, and eventually I just get a little bit better, and then my mind clicks and it's like, damn, I figured out what I was trying to do. Also, what I mean by working solo is that most of your game will be seen as your work, not from a team. Consider this, despite the fact that my games, like Sonic After the Sequel, had a whole team of musicians, the game is still considered to be made by me, not the team itself, even though what they did had a pretty big impact on it. While I'm glad it happened that way, most of the game portion of After the Sequel was made by me, and if the music team wasn't there, the game would have been made regardless. You notice I said most. Well, during development of my first game, before the sequel, this didn't used to happen a lot. But after that got released and I started working on After the Sequel, some people came to my aid and on their own decided to help me here and there, mostly with some artwork and sprites. That's the thing, when people like you, they'll come to you. That's also how I met Falk and the rest of the music team, surprisingly. This is how this whole story really got started. He came to me due to the fact that before the sequel was a finished game. I think I might have forgot to mention this, but I think it goes without saying that when you work solo, you'll be working on your idea and that idea alone. It'll be your game and nobody else's. You have as much autonomy as you wish, and really, no one is really gonna stop you from doing whatever you are doing. Oh, okay, I'm fucking done. I'm done talking about the solo route and teams. I hope I covered most things. Now, let's talk about the fun part. It's engine time! But first, here is a little bummer. If you want accurate Sonic physics, you should go to ROM hacking or modding. Unfortunately, you won't be getting much of that with fan games. All engines have their own pros and cons, and while some might have more accurate physics, it also may lack in several other features you might want for your game. With that in mind, it's also foolish to wait for an engine that has yet to be released and claims to have accurate physics. While that could be true, it can also lack in features or be on a platform that isn't very easy to use as some of its competitors. in summary, physics shouldn't be a priority if you're making fan games, especially if you're in it for the learning. Use what you currently have. Your first game won't be a masterpiece. Lower your expectations and approach game making with an open mind. Actually, calling a Sonic engine an engine is a little bit of a misnomer. What they are really is just a piece of code pre-built on top of an actual game engine. This code tries to emulate the basics of Sonic gameplay. Right, so I'll start by talking about the softwares which those engines are built on, or game engines, and later move on to the engines themselves. Let's first start with 2D classic Sonic based engines. First, let me start off with the one of the most knowledge of, and is known to be the easiest to get started in. ClickTeam Fusion 2.5 and Sonic Worlds. Fusion 2.5 is a weird game making software. It uses a lot of visual coding for its programming, as in you'll be coding in a visual drag and drop interface, while you'll be doing some minimal written code here and there. Its level editor is relatively easy to use, although a bit clunky sometimes. It's pretty alright overall. It also has an inbuilt image and frame-by-frame animation editor that can be quite useful. However, it's mainly useful for pixel art animation. From my experience anyways, it doesn't seem like it's very compatible with HD graphics in some ways, and it's mainly very similar to older versions of Paint, surprisingly enough. For pixel artists, that's actually a pretty good deal, but if you want to go for high-quality HD art, it might not be so good. However, you can still import your own images from Photoshop, so it's not like it's a big deal anyways. The pros of ClickTeam Fusion 2.5 is that it's very easy to use at first, but the cons are that it can get quite limiting once you know it in and out, and things that are very basic in some engines require quite glitch-esque tricks to get working in Fusion. Another big problem for new users is that Fusion can be quite expensive, and the free version is so limited it's not possible to run Sonic Worlds on it. In fact, it has a very low and dumb object limit that stops you from doing almost anything serious. Another problem with Fusion is that it's not very well documented at all, and not very widely used. That means you'll be hard to find help online without directly questioning an experienced user, which are becoming incredibly hard to find by the day. You also won't find many help documents or questions in a lot of places. You will find some, but not much. At least compared to several other engines where you have just a lot of them. Like everywhere, like YouTube tutorials and everything. I don't think I was able to find a single YouTube tutorial for ClickTeam Fusion back when I was actually starting. Alright, so let's talk about the most widely used engine in ClickTeam Fusion, Sonic Worlds. While I know that there is other engines made on ClickTeam Fusion, a lot of them just kind of were somewhat inferior to Worlds, as in mostly timeline-wise. They were made before Worlds, and was back when people were actually figuring out how to do an engine with what they called back in the day 360 movement, which is just angle detection, being able to actually have Sonic run on slopes. Believe it or not, back in the day, fan games didn't used to have that. Most of them only had Sonic running on a flat surface, and collision would glitch out a lot because it used one of ClickTeam Fusion's pre-built collision systems, and that thing fucking sucked. It was bad, and if you play one of the fan games from back in the day or watch the Vinesauce video on it, you'll see that in action. Most of those are Multimedia Fusion 2 or Click and Play fan games, which is made by the same company as far as I know. Fusion 2.5 is actually a newer version and an updated version of Multimedia Fusion 2, which is very, very old. Anyways, back to Worlds. Sonic Worlds is a very old Sonic engine. Created before Fusion 2 was called the Multimedia Fusion 2. It has several versions, and each one has its own unique pros and cons. Let's go over a few of those. The first one, and the one that I started with, is Sonic Worlds 0.5. It's a much older version of Worlds, and it can have some glitches. I used to recommend this version to new users, but now I just see no reason to it. Feel free to skip this one. It's a little bit too glitchy, and fixing those glitches is gonna teach you something about the engine, but it's not going to help you that much in the long term. Now, Sonic Worlds Delta is the current official branch of Worlds. It isn't really official, it's mostly being taken by one guy, but it is the most complete version of Worlds with an overwhelmingly amount of features. While that's a good thing, it can get pretty confusing for someone that's new to it, and in my opinion, the base stats on characters can make them feel quite sluggish. So you're probably gonna have to tweak this one a little bit. Decisions recommended if a lot of features is what you're looking for. However, you may not find a lot of use for a lot of them. Like there's some things in this engine specifically that are not present in the classic games. There are just features that were added in from other games, including some from mine actually, but also features that are just like, there's this one thing that you grab onto, it's like a rocket that throws you forward, and it's just there. And that's why we're gonna come to simple Sonic Worlds and not so simple Sonic Worlds. This is my personal branch of Sonic Worlds and is built on top of Delta. I designed them to be as easy as possible to use and compiling some crucial things I was able to make during the development of Spark, my first original game. It also strips out Delta of most of its features in order to make it as simple to use as possible. Not only that, but it simplifies the code quite a bit, making it easier to understand. At least I hope it did. Simple Worlds is the easiest version of Worlds to get running, while almost any other version of Sonic Worlds, including Delta, will require a couple of extensions, which sometimes can be tricky to find for someone that's really new to this. However, there's another version which I mentioned, which is not so simple Worlds. First, just like Delta, it requires a couple of extensions to use, but it has a couple of features Delta doesn't have, like a scalable resolution and several other things. However, there is more. Not So Simple Worlds EX is a version of Not So Simple made in my Worlds tutorial series. Not So Simple Worlds EX is a version of Not So Simple made in my Worlds tutorial series. It features a new character, that being Classic Sonic EX, in a new stage made during the tutorial. Big Not So Simple Worlds is the same as regular Not So Simple, but it features a much bigger resolution and a scalable Sonic. This version is for games that don't want to go for pixel art, instead go for a much higher resolution. In conclusion, Sonic Worlds is highly recommended for new users, and it has the potential to be used in a professional capacity as well. For example, Freedom Planet was made on top of Sonic Worlds Delta, from what I know, and Spark was made on top of Sonic Worlds 0.5. Overall, a good choice if you're just starting out. However, I do think it is a good idea for you to move on to something else after you're done with Click Fusion. Now, onto GameMaker. To my knowledge, GameMaker requires coding, but its coding language seems to be simple enough. Although, I've heard it can encourage some really bad habits from long-time GameMaker users, and those have since abandoned the software. Still, it can be used for professional projects as well. As I'm not very familiar with GameMaker myself, I'll be relying on someone else for this one. Morse, the creator of the fan game Super Mario Flashback, helped me out with this one and provided a description of most GameMaker versions at Sonic Engines. Please excuse me if this feels a bit different from the rest of the video. So, according to Morse, GameMaker 1.1 was the first version. GameMaker 2.0 and 3.0 were just improvements over the first version, he guesses. He's unfortunately not very familiar with those. GameMaker 4.0 was rewritten from scratch and also completely redesigned. The design introduced in this version was used until GameMaker Studio 2. It's not backwards compatible with the previous version, but it's technically possible to import a game made with GameMaker 4.0 to the last version of GameMaker Studio 2, but it most likely won't work due to the differences. GameMaker 4.3. It adds paths and makes the event structure closer to how it is today. GameMaker 5. It tweaks the interface even more and makes it look a lot closer to the more recent versions of GameMaker. It also adds data files and timelines to the engine, as well as several new actions. This is also the first version that is not free and requires a registration, but the engine can still be used without registration. GameMaker 5.1 adds a particle system that is exclusive to the registered version. It also shows a small made with GameMaker box during the loading screens of games that are created without registration. From what I can tell from Morse's description of several versions of GameMaker, it seems like GameMaker can be downloaded for free. I can't confirm that myself, but it seems like that will be the case, so just saying that. GameMaker 5.2 improves the room editor, adds multiple layers for tiles, as well as allows you to use particles with drag and drop. GameMaker 5.3 adds more advanced collision functions, constants, and has a completely rewritten path system. GameMaker 6.0 adds a 3D functionality, allows simple 3D games to be made, also adds alpha transparency, rotating sprites, color blending, and several other new actions. Most of those new features are exclusively to the registered version though. Games made with this version, as well as the IDE itself, don't work with Windows Vistas or newer OSs for some reason, but there's a converter for the games that fixes this problem. GameMaker 6.1 adds a much more complex particle system, as well as a more simplified effects engine, and improves the image editor slightly. GameMaker 7.0. GameMaker gets bought by Yo-Yo Games, and this is the first version released by them. There's a new extension system, Vista support, and etc. There's also a new registration system. They also released the Mac version much later. GameMaker 8.0. There's now a new logo, full support for sprites with alpha transparency, triggers, built-in tutorials, and other shit. The code editor now has code completion, which makes programming GML much easier. There's an improved image editor that allows zooming in and out. I wonder why it took them so long to add something this simple. This is something that Moore said. Damn, it took several versions for them to add alpha to sprites. That's amazing. Anyways, my comments aside. In my opinion, this is the earliest version of GameMaker that can still be used today, but I would still suggest going with GameMaker Studio 1 or 2. GameMaker 8.1. There's a much better room editor that allows zooming in and out. The registration system from 7.0 is also removed and replaced with a much better one. Since this version is pretty old at this point, games made with this version, as well as older ones, have several compatibility problems with newer versions of Windows. On some computers, the game runs very slowly, and they consistently crash on Windows 8 due to sound-related issues. GameMaker Studio 1. There's a lot of changes with this one. First of all, it allows exporting for multiple platforms like Android, iOS, HTML5, and etc. There's a new compiler called YYC. Before that, when you exported a game, you would simply bundle the game source with a runner. Now, with this compiler, the games are actually being properly compiled, making them several times faster. You'll still have the option for the old runner though, but it's also rewritten in C++ to increase performance and compatibility. This comes at a cost though. A lot of commonly used functions, such as screen refresh and screen redraw, are removed, and several others are drastically changed, making it harder to convert games made with older versions of GameMaker to this one. There's also support for vector graphics and shaders now, the latter actually being really useful for special effects. There's also a better audio engine too, allowing playing OGG files and better compatibility as GameMaker 8 games like crashing a lot because of the sound engine. This version also introduces the GameMaker Marketplace, where you can download assets and shit. There are several other new things that I couldn't list, like a better image and room editors and etc. The biggest downside of this version of GameMaker is the stability of the IDE. It's very unstable, and sometimes it gives random errors, corrupts your projects on rare occasions, and it can also get very sluggish in certain computers. A lot of design aspects of it are really outdated too, like the room editor, which is pretty bad by today's standards, and the whole look of the UI, which is ugly and dated, but hey, at least it was cheap back then. GameMaker Studio 2. This version has a completely new and rewritten IDE that runs much more smoothly, and it's also much more stable. The whole interface is completely redesigned for better or worse. A lot of the functions are replaced and changed. The wheels are replaced with a new camera system, drag and drop is completely overhauled, the backgrounds and sprites are combined, etc. Unlike GameMaker Studio 1, importing projects from the previous versions of GameMaker is really easy. The room editor has layers, animated tiles, auto tiling. There's also a new image editor I personally hate, but it might be just me. There are several new useful functions and drag and drop actions too. There's also now workspaces. Most windows exist in a workspace where they can't overlap, and it's actually quite sluggish. On resolutions lower than 180p, it makes the engine really hard to use, as the feature seems to be designed with only higher resolutions in mind. As for Sonic engines, Sonic Max. It's Teapot's very accurate recreation of the Genesis classic Sonic games in Studio 1. It has a lot of gimmicks from the older games, near perfect physics, and other stuff. The only thing that wasn't too accurate was the camera. The rest is near perfect. Sonic Dash engine. It's an old engine for GameMaker 8. It's old and outdated. Gmate. It's also a very accurate engine made by Shiro Violet Falk and whatever name he was going before passing away. It's for both GameMaker Studio 1 and GameMaker 8. Okay, I'm gonna interject again and say that when I mentioned before that there's people on the internet that extort people for money, Shiro, or Falk, that being his name, was that person that I mentioned. Last year he was caught doing that and just refused to provide any proof that he was actually in those bad situations. Then later he came around and said that he died and the person speaking for him was his wife. We don't know who she is or if she even exists. It's most likely himself. And now apparently he's coming around and saying that he is a friend of Falk, not to be confused with the Falk that worked for my games, and it's just really hard to believe. He never provides any proof of anything. It really seems like this person just scammed a lot of people out of money and is just running around with it. Even though he did make this engine, I personally wouldn't recommend you use this engine because of that situation. In a lot of cases, people might get really good at working on an engine and then they think, well, maybe I can use this to make a commercial project, like with what Freedom Planet did or with what I did. But if you're gonna make a professional game on top of an engine which the author isn't reliable and has been known to be caught lying and extorting money from people, I wouldn't do such a thing. So be on the watch for that. As far as I can tell, Teapot isn't like that, and he's already making his own engine to compete with the likes of Clixy Fusion and probably even Unity. So go with Sonic Max, probably. Just my personal recommendation. Anyways, back to the thing. AeroGP's engine. It's for Game Maker Studio 1 as well, and it has fewer features than other engines, but it's still pretty good, I guess. Those are all I know, and I'm no expert on this subject. Anyways, this is the end of Morse's description, and as far as I know, AeroGP's engine is actually pretty accurate to Sonic physics. It has the problem of not having many features, but that's one of the drawbacks I spoke before. So this is it for Game Maker. I personally don't have any experience with it, but I do know several people that have made games on it. Another point is that I also hear a lot of complaints. People just love to complain about Game Maker, I guess. But then again, all engines have their issues. So at the end of the day, this is up to you. It does require a little bit of coding though, so it's your choice. Okay, before I move on a little side note, Shiro, or Falk, conveniently passed away after he was discovered to be extorting money from people. Moving on to Construct. Well, Construct is a game engine, but you probably shouldn't be using Construct. Construct is similar to Fusion in many ways, but to my knowledge, the only Sonic engine that exists in it is quite buggy and pretty bad at the moment. I'm not very familiar with it either, and I don't see much reason to use it over Fusion. Currently, especially for fan games, it's not a recommendation on my part. Now on to Unity. I will be talking more about it in the 3D engine section, but for 2D, you're almost out of luck. It has Sonic Realms, a 2D engine, but Unity itself is a floating point based engine. That means it isn't very well suited for pixel art. While it is possible to get pixel art on Unity, it requires quite a bit of experience. Sonic Realms itself is quite of an oddball. I don't have much experience with it myself, but it has shown to be a very overly complicated engine, using Unity features that are best left to the professional developers instead of people who are just starting out. And that's really it. That was most mainstream 2D Sonic game engines. Most of them aim to mimic the gameplay of the classic Sonic games, but since they're just code, they can easily be edited and remade to suit almost any type of gameplay style, including a more modern Sonic game. So if you want to do something like Sonic Rush or the advanced games, it's possible to do those for the most part. They will require a little bit of experience though. If you're just starting, Fusion 2.5 and Sonic Worlds might be your best bet. However, if you have some programming experience, you can always try Game Maker. Now for other genres of games, like RPGs, you can always try out RPG Maker. And for everything else, there's always Unity. Seriously, Unity can be used to make almost any type of game of any genre, it's just some basic coding. But okay, maybe 2D isn't your thing. Maybe you're a fan of the 3D games. However, with the change to the third dimension comes an increase in the skill floor. 3D requires far more skill than 2D, not only because 3D Sonic is inherently more complicated than 2D, but 3D Sonic isn't very well defined, and even most official attempts at making a 3D game Sonic can be very flawed. And also, for 3D games, it requires a lot more knowledge of several subjects. This includes 3D modeling, texturing, UV mapping, 3D level design, which is exponentially more harder to get right than in 2D. For 2D, you have a solid base, but for 3D, the base is quite floaty and a bit broken. Anyways, let's get into our first software, Unity. Unity is currently probably the most used game engine in the world. It's used in almost every mobile game ever and several AAA and indie games. Some notable examples are City Skylines, Subnautica, Hearthstone, Hollow Knight, and many more. It's also reasonably well documented compared to most, and it has a lot of help online you can seek. Tons of Unity tutorials are uploaded every day on YouTube as well, making learning this engine easier for a lot of people. Overall, Unity is just a really good choice to get into game development. Also, Unity is free of charge for small developers. On Sonic engines, however, you have a growing selection of engines that are spanning out of Hedge Physics. Hedge Physics was originally created by me, with an attempt to give people and myself a code base to make Sonic-like games. Its gameplay is more or less based on the Adventure series, and most features are those present on that series as well. However, it's quite basic and made to be retooled into any other type of Sonic game. Since I'm the creator, I can't really speak to how difficult it is to use and its quality. Just know that if you know Unity well enough, you'll likely have an easy time with it. another side note, I also got a little bit of help from Damesian. He helped me out with a thing that I really didn't know how to do, so he also deserves a little bit of credit here. At the time of this writing, I don't know how many Hedge Physics spin-offs have been released. In the event that it happens later down the line, I'll make sure to link them on the Hedgeland Discord server, which will be in the description. Okay, so another option we got in 3D is the Unreal engine and its Sonic engine, Sonic GDK. I don't have myself that much experience with the current version of Unreal. I used to use it way back and it was quite different, so as far as I can tell anyways, Unreal has improved a lot since the old days and it's probably much better than what I will make it out to be, but nonetheless, Unreal is sort of similar in some spots to Unity, but I can't really speak to its documentation. I'm assuming you can find a lot of YouTube tutorials if needed. Unreal is quite widely used, although Unreal is somewhat more complicated to use as compared to something like Unity. It's a AAA game engine and it's mostly used for AAA games. As such, it requires somewhat a high level of skill. Here we have things like Sonic GDK. On Sonic GDK, while I can't really speak for how GDK is on the current versions of Unreal, I used it a bit in the past and I mostly didn't have a very good time with it. Mostly due to the way Unreal was. Despite of that though, GDK doesn't seem to be based off any particular modern Sonic game, and it is instead quite clunky. However, if you have some skill, you should be able to retool it into something usable. That, well, has yet to be done by anyone. Except for that one guy who turned into a classic Sonic game, in 2D, which, you know, it's quite impressive, it looked quite good, but talking about 3D here. Like Unity, Unreal is free to small developers as well. So what about Blitz 3D? Don't! I know it was used to make Sonic World, but at this current state of things, even the team behind that is moving to something else. Blitz is quite outdated and requires a very high level of knowledge in programming. Oh boy, we did it! We're reaching the end and I hope this guide is useful to you. I may or may not be making more of those, maybe expand on some concepts, but so far, I hope this will give you a good starting point and hopefully not discourage you from making games. The thing is, I can't put a nice coat of paint in this and say it'll be alright. My reasons for making this video is to help you guys not make mistakes I've personally made myself and seeing others do over and over again. So, that's it. I'll see you guys next time, if it ever happens.